Welcome to the Whissel Way podcast. My name is Kyle Whissel, your host with eXp Realty in San Diego, joined by Victor Menasce with Y Street Capital. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about passive investing via vehicles like syndications, funds, and all the sorts. So super excited to dive into it. If you're watching the show, you ever have a question you want to have us answer on the show, you can always go to thewhisselway.com. You can ask us questions on there, subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel. You can join our private Facebook group and email newsletter. We share a lot of tips and tricks. You can also get on our referral list for all the people that are leaving California. Lastly, if you're looking to level up your content creation game, we offer a course on there called the Medium Air Mastermind. We'll teach you everything you need to know, audio, video, social, the whole nine when it comes to content creation. So that's all at the Whissel Way podcast. All right, Victor, I'm excited to have you on here today because I think we're gonna share some knowledge with our listeners, with our viewers about investing that a lot of them haven't been exposed to in the past. And I know as we were prepping for the show today, you had this analogy that I think is a perfect analogy to kick off and help them understand what is a syndication. So let's kick it off with this analogy and we'll go from there.
Well, great to be here, Kyle. As always, you're a dear friend and a partner in several projects, so excited to be here. Let me maybe start with just a little bit of context in terms of who Y Street Capital is so that we can frame this a little bit better. We're a development company. We're based in both the United States and Canada. Our Canadian headquarters is in Ottawa, Canada's capital, which is where I'm located. Our U.S. headquarters is in Salt Lake City, and we're active in 9 states across the U.S. We develop apartments, senior housing, storage. We do a fair bit of land development, a couple of thousand acres of land development, and we do a fair bit of flex multi-tenant industrial. So we are developers. And so that maybe sets a little bit of context for what we're about to talk about, because like any developer, we run out of money. And so we are often in the marketplace looking to raise capital, but that's a synergistic relationship. It's not that we're hungry for money. We're actually providing an opportunity for investors to collaborate with us on projects. Where historically, large projects like this were in the domain only of very high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals that would write multiple 7, 8, 9-figure checks to get these projects done. And the analogy that you and I talked about before is quite simple. It's a little bit like air travel. If you had to go charter your own jet to travel wherever you want to go on vacation, then air travel would be limited only to the ultra wealthy. But we don't do that. We don't even think about it. We actually do syndicate our air travel by a whole bunch of folks who don't know each other getting together and each writing a check to United Airlines or American or whoever your favorite carrier is. And that air carrier is indeed syndicating air travel so that all of these folks who don't know each other get on a plane together and they head to Miami. And then they all get off. That is a form of syndication where you are entrusting your funds to, in this case, a sponsor or a promoter, to use securities language. And that is a form of syndication. You're pooling money together to achieve a common outcome. And we do the same thing in the world of real estate investing by pooling investors together. Now, I think it's important to set some context as well when we talk about that. Number one, anytime there's a passive investment of one form or another, if you've got an active party and a passive party, that defines a security. That's kind of the layman's definition of a security. And I'm not a securities lawyer, let alone an American securities lawyer, because I'm based here in Canada. But the general definition is if there's a passive party and an active party and there's an expectation of a profit, that's a security in one form or another. So there's really only 3 types of securities. Number one would be a registered security. This might be like shares in General Motors or Tesla or something like that. It's a publicly listed company. The second would be an exempt security, which means it's exempt from registration. It's not exempt from following the rules. You still have to meet all the SEC rules. And then the third are illegal. So we don't like to play in the third category. So unless this is a public REIT, a real estate investment trust, generally speaking, these types of investments fall into the category of an exempt market security. So let me pause there and see where you want to take it from here.
For sure. Yeah, I love the plane analogy. I've flown private one time, and it was the most money I think I've ever spent on anything outside of a property in my life. And I get it, right? Like it was like a once in a lifetime thing for me, and I think that a lot of people want to fly private, they just don't because it's too expensive. And the same way, I think a lot of people want to invest into bigger properties, but they don't because it's too expensive. So they just say, well, I guess I'm just gonna, most people listening to this, they're flipping houses, right? Or maybe they buy like a 2 to 4 unit property, but they're very restricted on how big of a project they can get to. And in their head, psychologically, like I'll just never be able to do an apartment building. I'll never be able to buy a storage facility. Like I'm just gonna be stuck buying these houses. And what's interesting is like when you're buying houses, that is a super competitive space, right? Like there's millions of homes selling every single year. And there's even, multi-millions of people that want to buy those homes, right? Even, in today's market, you're still seeing 5, 10 offers on every single home. It's not the same case. There's not nearly as much competition as you start to step up in price because it's a simple supply and demand thing. There's only so much demand for these large assets because the small guy typically can't get into it. But via a syndication, it now makes that a reality where I can now own a piece of a Class A office building. I can now own not a single family or a 4-unit property. I can own a 400-unit property, or I can own a 1,000-unit self-storage facility. So it starts to make it possible for people to get into these higher asset classes they couldn't otherwise be a part of. And they don't have to lift a finger, which is interesting. So talk about like the passive side of it, because that's what's interesting. Like if I flip a house, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of brain damage going through to the point that also restricts some people from investing. It's like they think they can, or if they think they can, the amount of work it's going to take holds them back from doing it. So via syndication, you can now get into asset classes you thought never possible, and you can do it without all that brain damage. So talk about the passive side of things.
Well, I'm pleased you mentioned the whole question of scale because it's so important. I see a lot of folks that are looking to invest in real estate, trying to stay small because they think that's, money's the constraint, and they think that that's all they can afford. In my experience, the truth is it's easier to go bigger because there are no passive businesses. These are all active businesses. And if you've ever owned a portfolio of 10 or 15 or 20 single family homes and self-manage those, you know exactly how active that is. These are not passive businesses. In fact, the tax authority does us a little bit of a disservice by calling it passive income because there's nothing passive about it. Now, you can invest passively in an active business, but an active business has all of the same functions that you would need for any business. It doesn't matter if it's a restaurant, a hotel, a technology company, a real estate investment business. All of those same functions have to be there. You need your finance team, the executive team, a quality assurance team, the technical folks doing the work. You need a sales and marketing team. You need all of those functions just like you would need in any single business. And if the business is too small, it doesn't throw off enough cash to afford all those functions. So it's going to be crippled and not very effective. So from my point of view, if I'm building a 1-unit single family home or a 10-unit building or a 100-unit building, the effort's almost identical. So given that that's true, why wouldn't I go bigger? Well, a lot of people say that, well, the constraint's money. I don't have enough money. Okay, fine. Pull a few friends together. Maybe you can afford it together. But the effort, the scarce item is actually not the money. Scarce item is time and the talent. If you can assemble the talent, you can assemble the money, the rest kind of works itself out. So that's why we like to go bigger. And it makes things possible. You get better deals, like you said, when things are bigger. I'll just give you a simple example. And maybe not, this may seem out of reach, but it's a real life example. Here I am in Ottawa, Canada, and some dude in Ottawa, Canada purchased 1,783 acres on the edge of Colorado Springs. And I didn't put in any of my own cash. That was 100% syndicated through 37 investors. It was a $20 million purchase, or just under $20 million. We bought this land at $10,000 an acre, all cash. Post annexation, post entitlement into the city of Colorado Springs, we should see about a 20 times multiple on that investment. That's why the investment made sense, right? But if I looked in my pocket, I didn't have 20 million kicking around to go do that deal. So it never even entered my mind that I would have to go look for that money in my own bank account. Of course I was going to syndicate it. Of course I was going to get a bunch of folks together who saw the value in that asset and would be willing to come in. And lo and behold, we did it. So it's really understanding it's finding that fit between the goals for the project and the goals for the money. And if that fit isn't there, then don't invest. It's not going to work. So when we talk about what that fit is all about, it's questions like, well, what is the size of the investment? What's the term of the investment? How long is the money going to be tied up for? What is the risk? What is the rate of return? What's the security? What's the control structure? What's the tax consequence? These are all questions you want to be asking yourself when you're evaluating an investment opportunity. And the sponsor of that particular project, doesn't matter what it is. It could be a multifamily apartment project. It could be senior housing. It really kind of storage. It could, any of many different asset classes. They're going to present you with something. You're going to get, 120, 150 pages. The offering memorandum is probably going to be 60 pages of that, and another 40-page operating agreement for the new entity that's formed for that particular project. And then probably a 20-page executive summary, and then a few other ancillary documents. So you're into probably 150 pages. But even if you put all of that aside, even before you get into that, you've got to ask three basic questions. You want to be looking at the investment through the same lens that we would. Number one, who's behind the deal? Do they have the experience? You're really evaluating the people. And if you're not comfortable with the people, don't do it. Second is, are you comfortable with the submarket? Can you really understand the supply-demand dynamics in that submarket and be convinced, and not just for the next 6 months, but for the life of the project, is that supply-demand imbalance there, and is it make sense? And then number three, then look at the specifics of the deal. When in fact, often what I see people doing is I see them leading with the deal first, and it's never about the deal. Because a good deal badly managed, of course, is no deal. So it's always about, have you got the best people? Is the submarket conditions make for a good opportunity? Because you're ultimately buying into that submarket, not just one deal. And then, yes, the specifics of the deal. So it's those three that we look at any project through that lens. So back to syndication. So why does syndication make sense? It's because these larger deals now become possible. You're not having to charter a private jet. You can fly United or EasyJet. You can get on the discount carrier if you want. It's a different way to travel. It's not going to be quite as luxurious. You might have to buy a bottle of water and pay extra for your cabin baggage, but it's still possible through syndication. So that's why we do it. Of course, there are larger investors. The easiest thing to do is to go to a family office that's willing to write a 5 or 6 figure check or a 7-figure check and get the project done. But if you're not, if you want to make it available to other folks that otherwise would be doing small deals, would be stuck in a exchange traded fund from like Vanguard or BlackRock or one of these. That too is speculation. I'm not a speculator. I prefer to invest in projects where the fundamentals make sense, where the comps are there, meaning the rent checks settle every month. It's not just, you got hundreds and hundreds of data points to prove that, these things are happening just within a single building. Whereas oftentimes, and as realtors, this, you see one property sell on a block, and then all of a sudden, everyone thinks their property's worth $100,000 more than it was a week ago, and that price discovery hasn't happened. So it might be worth that on paper, but not in reality. Whereas In the world of investing, there's just so much more data. It's much more systematic.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned, like, let's go back to that Colorado Springs deal. We talked about there's already less competition because of price point. Then you get into the niche of land development, right? Or you get into the niche of self-storage or some of these niches. So it's like, as you go up in price, competition naturally comes down. And then you get into specific niches at those price points, so your competition falls even further to where, how many people could take down that size piece of land and understand what to do with it. Like, your competition is so small at that price point, that size of land with that intention. You have very little competitors where, right, that house that sold for $100,000 more, there was probably 20 competitors for that one house, right? Like, so it's crazy when you can eliminate a lot of that competition, that you now are into these opportunities that you would have never otherwise been a part of. So talk about like the sponsor, right? Because that's one of the keys here that you mentioned is you got to have a sponsor that you believe in, because you got to believe that sponsor knows what to do with all that land, right? So talk about like what to look for in a sponsor.
You're really looking for someone that's going to go fight for their investor, because things are going to happen in the marketplace that are unexpected. Oh my gosh, we could have a global pandemic and the world's going to shut down for 2 years. Are they going to survive that? Oh, we're going to see record interest rate increases. Are they going to survive that? You want to make sure that you're working with someone that has the tenacity, the skills, the bench depth to navigate their way through whatever headwinds the market's going to throw at you. And if you don't, then chances are you might lose your investment if they don't have that skill set and that capacity. So that is probably the number one, is do they have that ingenuity, that creativity to be able to just navigate? Who do I want in the lifeboat with me if the ship is going down? That's really the question. And it sounds morbid, but that's really the question is, do you have those people that you can really count on to go to bat for you when things get difficult? Because there will absolutely be headwinds that come at you in any project. We see it. I mean, we're humbled, even projects that we think are simple, even those that we did one exactly like that 2 blocks away. This one should just be a carbon copy. No, it's not. Something else happened, and so we had to figure it out. So I think that's probably the number one thing. That is the key differentiating factor is does the team have that skill?
And then I think the experience factor too. Like, I know at Y Street, I mean, how many syndications have you guys done over the years?
That's a good question. I don't even know. I really don't. Yeah, I don't even know. I'd have to go work it out. And one of the things that we do is, even in projects, let's say if we're going into a particular market where we're not necessarily the subject matter expert in that submarket, we'll go recruit the best people in that market. For example, we're doing a project up in Spokane, Washington, and one of our partners, a gentleman named Bob Keener, he so far has built about 10,000 units of multifamily apartments in his career, about 3,000 of those for his own personal account. This guy's seen it all. So he's a partner with us on that project. We work on a number of things together. We don't do everything together, but I always want to track that experience that maybe we don't need it, but it's probably going to come in handy at some point. Even in Colorado Springs, we recruited one of our investment partners. He's a part of the co-GP team. His father was the county commissioner. His wife is the current county commissioner. They can invite all of the members of city council over for a barbecue and they'll all show up. I can't do that. So it's really just attracting the right talent. And it's not to necessarily lobby those folks or anything like that, but they can have conversations that I can't. And that there's value in that.
Love that. So let's talk about just an example of a syndication deal. So most syndications, what kind of money does somebody have to bring in? How long does that money typically stay in, and what kind of returns should people be looking for?
I can tell you what we target, because what we always, if something doesn't meet that basic criteria, we're not going to launch it as a project. In fact, We don't find deals. We don't hunt for them. They all come to us, and we evaluate them, and we look at how they can be transformed into something that would be highest and best use. And that could be starting from a raw piece of land and building a building, or it could be taking something existing and transforming it. Either way, we're looking for some minimum rate of return. And so we have to have enough margin in that even in a high interest rate environment, that we're still going to deliver a decent rate of return to investors. And if we can't do that, we're not going to do it. So what does that mean? It means for us, we're typically targeting rates of return to the investor north of 20%. I know that sounds high. That might sound even like a scary high number for some, but we know that in the presence of headwinds, 22% rate of return could be eroded. It might become 18, might become 15. But if we start out with an 8%, a project that delivers 8%, 8% can become 2 in a heartbeat and can become -5 if two things go wrong. So we have to have that margin in the project so that it is, number one, his inherent resilience. And number two, sometimes we do better. Like, for example, that Colorado Springs deal should do better than our target by a wide margin. I mean, we bought the dirt. Think about this. We bought 77 million square feet at 23 cents a square foot. That's right?
So crazy. Why am I not in that deal? I should be in that one. Yeah.
So
what's like a normal timeline on something, on a syndication?
I don't know that there's any normal. I mean, we are inherently buy and hold, build and hold investors ourselves. That is our philosophy. We like to be collectors of properties, which means never sell. However, sometimes we get stupid offers and we will evaluate them and we do exit. But if there's if you've got something that is doing well, you've created enough value that you can refinance and maybe pull back your initial equity investment, but still be sitting on a decent debt to equity ratio that's not over leveraged, at that point, you're effectively delivering infinite return. What are you going to buy to replace it that's better than that? So we prefer not to sell. Now, there can be multiple different exits. A refinance is a very legitimate exit. It's a way of getting your chips off the table. And as long as you're not over leveraged, still, maintain a ownership in a decent cash flowing asset with no cash tied up in it. That's kind of the pinnacle of what everyone seeks to achieve. It's gotten more difficult today in the current interest rate environment. Let's be clear, but that's still the goal. Typically, you're looking for that exit anywhere in the 1 to 5 year time frame. That's typically. So, for example, we have a land deal that we're doing on the edge of Salt Lake City. It's in a suburb of Salt Lake City. That's probably going to exit in under 2 years. But that's purely a land play. It was taking 21 acres, getting it rezoned, getting it entitled, and we're not going to go build the Marriott Hotel on it. Someone else is. We're just making a profit on the land in that particular instance. But so we target typically in the 1 to 5 year. Most investors often can't see beyond a 5 year horizon. So we often hear when we ask investors how long they want to have their money tied up for, we often hear something in the range of 5 to 10 years. So some projects will be a 10 year exit, some will be a 5, but it's usually in that range.
Okay. And then when you do the refi, that's not taxable, correct?
Refinance is not a taxable event. If you go borrow money, there's no tax owing on that.
So that's a beautiful thing, right? You're putting, let's just say $100,000 into a deal and you're getting cash flow on that. And then there's hopefully an exit in 1 to 5 years, get your $100,000 back, but now you're continuing to receive returns, even though you've already got your capital back. And like you said, that's infinite. So it's a beautiful thing.
Exactly. That's always the goal. It's certainly gotten a lot harder the last 24 months, but in fact, we're starting to see, as some of the newer projects that we're underwriting right now, that's still absolutely possible.
I love it. Okay, so let's shift gears now. We've talked about syndication. Obviously, that's project specific. Let's shift over into funds. Obviously, I'm working with you guys on a fund in the storage space. Why would somebody not do a syndication and instead go into a fund?
It's a good question, and there's no right or wrong. It's like, what's the best form of ice cream, chocolate or vanilla? It just depends what you like. So, there's no right or wrong. The advantage of a fund is, well, there's a few advantages. Number one, it offers inherently diversification of your investment. So if you're investing in storage and you have confidence in the operator, and the operator is going to do 4, 5, 6 projects geographically diversified that all have a similar formula, then a fund might make more sense. So, maybe this one is going to deliver, 18% return. This other one over here is going to do 26, 27. You'd like to be in the one that's 27 and you don't want to be in the one that's 12. So you get a little bit of smoothing out function by, law of averages, by having multiple assets. Even if the sponsor tells you that they're going to be the same, they're not going to be. Life just never works out that way. So you get a little bit of diversification, a bit of safety from that diversification by being in a fund. The other advantage for the fund manager, but also ultimately for the investor, is when you raise a fund, then you've got cash ready to deploy. That makes you a stronger buyer when it comes to competing for assets in the marketplace. Whereas if someone else is saying, well, yeah, I'm going to give you your price, but I'm going to give you a 4-month conditional period while I go raise the money and all of that, that's not as strong a buyer. And let's face it, in today's environment, people that are selling are not because they want to sell, it's usually because they have to sell. So there, at that point, the seller is looking for certainty of execution more so than price.
Yeah, I just lost out on a deal similar to that where I came in, I needed terms, and somebody else came in all cash, didn't need the terms, gave them more certainty, and I was willing to pay more money even, but they wanted that certainty, right? Because they needed the money. And I lost out on that deal. And I think that's a really good example of where having the fund, cash in the bank, ready to deploy, gives you just one more, right? As if there weren't enough advantages with asset class, size. Now you come in that you have more liquidity and can come in and do these deals much quicker than the little bit of competition you have. Now your unfair advantage is through the roof at this point.
Correct. Now, on the flip side, for those that want to invest in a single asset, many investors want to perform due diligence at the asset level. In a fund, it becomes more difficult to do that because they're putting money into, to some extent, a blind pool. Well, let's stretch the airline analogy again. You give your money to United, but you don't know if you're getting on a Boeing or an Airbus aircraft, right? It's a pool. You don't know. You might say, well, I'm not going to fly Boeing for whatever reason. I only want to fly on an Airbus aircraft. So then maybe, you don't get to make that choice in a fund. Whereas if you say, well, I want this airline and they only fly Airbus, okay, it's different. So maybe I'm overstretching the airline analogy here, but
Yeah, or you just know you're going to fly, but you don't know if it's even going to be American or United or
right.
Air Canada. I mean, it could be
Yeah.
anyone. You know you're going to fly, you just don't know the details of it. And
Yeah.
so some people, I get it. They want to know, like, I'm buying that building and we're doing this to it, right? They have that. It's more specific. Where with the fund, it's less specific. But I would say in the fund, you're betting even more so on the sponsor in the fund. Like the sponsor becomes exponentially more important because you are betting on that sponsor, knowing exactly what they're doing and finding the best opportunities, as opposed to a sponsor who already found a specific opportunity. So you really have to be even more focused on vetting your sponsor in a fund than you do on a syndication.
And that may be more difficult because in some cases, fund managers are not the actual operator that's doing the work, boots on the ground. Sometimes they're just a fund manager, where they're sourcing projects from multiple different operators. So then it even becomes more difficult to know the skill level of the folks that are actually executing the project. So as part of your due diligence, you want to know, are these folks that are raising the fund, are they actually the execution team, or are they subbing it out to someone else? You definitely want to know. You want to know who you're doing business with.
I love it. Well, let's talk about the specific fund that you guys are working on right now in the storage space. So when did this fund start? Where is it at? Where is it going? Let's dive into specifics.
Sure. So we launched our storage fund last year, and so right now we're in 2 assets. Eventually the goal is to be 6 to 10 assets. It's been a difficult environment to raise capital across the board. I think there's been a few headwinds over the last 24 months that have made investors nervous. Number one, the yield that you can get in risk-free money, meaning T-bills, has gone up. So if you're going to invest in something that has risk and you're only going to get 8%, why wouldn't you just invest in T-bills and you can get 5 and not take any risk at all? That's one thought process. But then, there's a big difference between 5% return and 20 or 25% return. Those are very different. So at some point you want to look at what is the asset, what's the skill of the team. And, today in the world of storage, we have a number of storage projects that we're doing outside the fund as well. We've done more outside the fund than in the fund, but we are continuing to raise for the fund for all the reasons we talked about. Our philosophy right now in storage is that most assets in storage today have experienced some headwinds. Specifically, and look, as realtors, this, transaction volumes are down. If someone's going to go rent a storage unit, there's usually a trigger event for that. It's not because it was a Wednesday, it's because somebody moved. Well, if there's fewer moves, there's fewer storage lockers being rented. So in most primary markets, rates are down significantly. There's a lot of competition. There's excess supply, especially in primary markets. The institutional players have moved in a big way, and the primary markets are somewhat saturated. Where the opportunity does exist, which is where we play, is in secondary and tertiary markets and in specialty segments. So, for example, even in primary markets, specialty products like boat and RV storage, industrial outdoor storage, those markets are underserved. If I think about Austin, Texas, and you are looking for a place to store your boat within a radius of Lake Travis, you're facing a 2-year waiting list. So even though there may be a ton of self-storage in Austin, there's a shortage of boat and RV. So segmenting the market, understanding it a little bit more deeply is vital because at the end of the day, it's all about meeting the laws of supply and demand. Supply and demand and ability to pay. You're not going to go put boat and RV storage in a rough neighborhood in Cleveland, let's say. It's got to be, it's supply and demand and ability to pay. It's got to be all of those things. So, the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts have this figured out. They go out a couple of weeks a year and they go sell cookies and apples and all of that. They go to the best neighborhoods to sell cookies. They don't go to the hood, right? Because they're going to get more for their cookies in the best neighborhood. In fact, the homeowner might flip them a 20 and say, keep the cookies. And that happens. Whereas in some neighborhoods, that's not the case. So don't just be out there looking for the cheapest asset out there. You want to be looking for the best asset out there.
Love that. So give me an example of, there's 2 projects in there right now. Let's just talk about one of the 2. And what do you guys we're building a project in Central Florida in a city called Winter Haven, which is an hour south of Orlando. It's in Central Florida. It's an industrial outdoor storage product. And the demand for this product is for contractors. Our boots on the ground guy, his name is Chris Long. The product is called Long Yards. It's a little play on his name. And these are contractor yards where it's very different than, say, boat and RV storage. I mean, think about it. If you're a contractor and you need a place to store your earth-moving equipment, it's not going in your laneway. Your HOA is not going to allow you to do that. You need a place to store it that's going to be secure, where you have individual security camera on your specific yard. You've got a power connection. So if you've got a trailer full of DeWalt battery-powered tools, you can plug it in overnight and you're not having to bring all these battery packs home. It's really understanding
the needs of that specific marketplace. You could have larger turning radius because these are bigger trucks. You have to carry heavier loads than you would with just cars traveling on it, and so on. So it's a specialized product for a very specific customer base, but it's one that's in very high demand, not just, of course, in Winter Haven, but actually nationwide.
Yeah, and I know Winter Haven, it's getting so much overflow from Orlando. Like the amount of building happening there is insane. I mean, all around Orlando is just growing, and Florida, a lot of people don't realize, like, a lot of Florida is not built out yet. So there's so much opportunity. So I love that, where you're going into, right, not the primary market, your secondary market, and you're in the specialty sector at the same time. So combine all of that together, and that's how you hit home runs.
Exactly. It's finding those inefficiencies in the market and identifying the needs. An executive at Motorola years ago told me something that stuck with me to this day, because I was talking to him. I was in his office. I was talking to him about the market. And he turned to me and he said, "Victor, I've never met a market that bought anything. Only customers do." And I was like, oh, that was just gold. And it stuck with me ever since. The folks listening to this, they're involved in sales conversations. They know this. There is no market. It's just customers.
Beautiful. Well, guys, if you're watching this show, if you want to get involved in this space, if you want to invest in a syndication or into a fund, I'd love to get you connected to Victor and the team at Y Street Capital. Just send me a DM on Instagram. We keep this very simple, at Kyle Whissel. I'll make a personal introduction to Victor. He can share with you all the opportunities that they have available. Whether you want to invest in a syndication, a fund, or you just want to find out that neither one of those are for you, that's fine too. Go through a process and figure out what's best for you and help you put your investment into the right place. And if you're getting some value out of the show today, if you've learned something from Victor, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button. If you have a question for us, throw it in the comments section. If you want more of this content, hit the subscribe button and the little notification bell. YouTube will let you know every time we drop a new episode. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, make sure to subscribe, follow the show. And if you get 2 minutes, you could write a review. Those reviews mean the world to us and helping more people learn about the show. So it's greatly appreciated. And before we wrap the show today, we want to finish with something we call the Whissel Widget of the Week. This is something we utilize in our business. It saves us time, makes us more money, or just helps us have a little bit more fun. So Victor, why don't you kick us off?
One of the things that we always struggle with is just keeping the number of balls in the air in our head. And so keeping track of all of that so that you're not carrying it in your head with you all day means getting it written down in a system and a process so that you can hand it off to somebody else. And we use Asana for that. We use it across our company. In fact, it's now become a verb. So if someone says, someone in a staff meeting will say, well, just Asana that to me. And what that means is put an action item for me in Asana, and that way it doesn't get lost. And it just makes it easier to track things. We just do a better job of execution by virtue of having a single global system within the company. Everybody uses it, from the top of the organization to the interns. Everyone uses it. And so it's just part of the universal language that we speak in the company.
Awesome. Yeah, check it out. Asana is fantastic. The one I'm going to share today, this is a new one that I just got introduced to this week. Our MLS locally, this is now a provided member benefit to help you build floor plans of properties. For the life of me, I don't understand why every listing agent doesn't provide a floor plan of their listing. I know our team does. So if you ever see a Whissel listing, there's going to be a floor plan, there's going to be a 3D tour. We want to make things easy for buyers. But the reality of it is most listing agents don't do that. So it could be really beneficial if you're working with a buyer, especially a buyer who's out of state, out of country, to give them a floor plan of a house. But you're probably like, well, that's a pain in the butt. I don't know how to do that. So our MLS is providing us with this app. And even if your MLS doesn't provide it, you want to pay for it. It's very inexpensive. It's called Cubicasa, Cubicasa, Cubicasa. And it's very simple. You just load up the app and you just walk around the house and just pan through room by room. And it's constantly scanning everything as you're doing it. And within 24 hours, you have a floor plan completed that you can now take that floor plan and share that with the buyer. And with the world that we're going into, where you are going to compete for buyers to work with you versus your competition. You need every advantage you can. So check it out, Kubicasa. With that said, yeah, I'll send you over a link for it. Yeah, it's very cool. It's wild how easy it is to use. It's kind of scary. I'm like, how the hell did you do that? I just walked around a room and scanned it in 5 seconds and you put a floor plan together. So super cool. So yeah, if you guys watch this, I hope you got a lot of value out of the show today. Again, I'd love to introduce you to Victor and the entire team at Y Street. Just send a DM over at Kyle Whissel. I'll facilitate that introduction. With that said, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Whissel Way podcast.